you remember the Bible story about Palm Sunday, something that Jesus said there caught my attention. In Luke 19 we read, "Then as he was drawing near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works they had seen, saying, 'Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest.' Now some of the Pharisees called to him from the crowd, 'Teacher, rebuke your disciples.' But he answered and said to them, 'I tell you, if these should keep quiet, the stones would immediately cry out.'" Now that one interesting verse, the stones would cry out. Now I remember hearing the song, "Ain't no stone gonna sing my praises." Questionable grammar, of course. But what would some stones say if they were going to be shouting out and talking? So I started looking in Scripture at some of the stones and rocks that we see in Scripture. And if you take out your outline, we're going to look at a few of them. I started looking at some significant stones in the Bible, and there were too many to do on one Sunday, so we'll have 2 Sundays looking at these stones. But the first one I want to look at is Jacob's stone. In Genesis 28, we read the following. "Now Jacob went out and went to Haran, and when he came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head and lay down to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set forth on the earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there were angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, 'I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I give to you, and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as dust of the earth. You will spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in you and your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go. I'll bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you.' Then Jacob awoke from his sleep, and said, 'Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.' And he was afraid, and said, 'How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven.' And Jacob arose early in the morning, and took that stone that he put on his head, and set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, which means house of God." So that stone had an important part in the life of Jacob. And for each one of these stones, if you see on your outline there, I want to point out a lesson that's good for us to remember from that stone. So one of the things that Jacob's stone would say, "God knows where you are." Now just imagine, remember he'd been fleeing from his brother who wanted to kill him. He'd been running all day. He was tired, exhausted. He lay down, and you really have to be tired to use a stone for a pillow, right? But he lay down, put his head on this stone, and that's when he had this dream with the ladder going up and down between heaven and earth, and angels going up and down. But he realized that even there, where he was, in the middle of nowhere, just running from his brother, God knew exactly where he was. And God could communicate with him. And sometimes at the most unusual locations or times in our life, something will happen that will remind us God knows where you are. I remember reading about a TV preacher from California named Ken Goff, and it was in the 1990s, but he was on a vacation, traveling with his family, and he was here in Ohio actually, at I-75 somewhere near Dayton, and they got off the freeway and just to get gas and food and rest a bit. And as he went by a phone booth, some of us older kids remember there were phone booths around, right? As he went by the phone booth, the phone was ringing, and he thought, that's strange, and nobody was coming to answer it. So he stopped and went over and cautiously picked the phone up and said hello. And a voice said, is Ken God there? And he said, what? And he said, is Ken God there? He said, well, yes, this is Ken, but who are you? And turned out it was a lady named Millie from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And she said, I really need some help. She said, I had a gun, I was ready to kill myself, but I realized God didn't want me to do that. But I'm not a Christian, I didn't know anybody who knew God. But I remembered hearing you on TV, or seeing you on TV, and I thought, if I could just talk to him, he could help me. But I didn't know your office, I didn't have any way to contact you. And she says, I was sitting there thinking, some numbers came to mind. So she said, I wrote them down, and it looked like a phone number. So she said, I called it, and that's how I'm calling this number. She said, are you in your office in California? He said, no, I'm in a phone booth near Dayton, Ohio. And so they both realized that this was something orchestrated by God. And he talked with her, counseled with her for a while, led her in a prayer to receive Christ and become part of God's family. And he said it was one of those amazing encounters. He said when he went back to join his wife at the restaurant, he said, guess what? God knows where I am. Now what an amazing story. And he knows where we are too, each one of us. We may think that nobody else knows or cares. I remember when I was a student at Ohio State University, one of 50,000 in that class, and felt like I was just a number at times. But there was a time in my devotions when God broke through, and I was reading Isaiah chapter 43, where it says, fear not, I have redeemed you, I have called you by your name, you are mine. And I thought, he knows my name. Nobody else at Ohio State may, but God knows who I am, and he knows where we are too. Look at the second stone, Moses' stone. Actually, there's two stones in Moses' life that are important. The first one in Exodus 17, it says, the people were thirsty for water. Remember, they're in the desert, they're in the wilderness. And they complained to Moses, why did you take us from Egypt and drag us out here with our children and animals to die of thirst? Just what every leader wants to hear from the people who are following. And Moses cried out to God in prayer, what can I do with these people? Any minute now, they'll kill me. God said to Moses, go on out ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take the staff that you used to smite the Nile, and go, and I'm going to present before you, there on the rock at Oreb, and you're to strike the rock, and water will gush out of it, and the people will drink. Moses did what he said, and the elders of Israel right there watching with him. Just imagine that scene. Here's a group of people, estimates put them almost between 1.5 and 2 million people, and they were out in the wilderness, they were thirsty, no water. You're the leader. They're already upset with you for being there to begin with. Now they think they're dying of thirst, and you're in danger, they're killing you, and God sends you out to this rock and tells you to hit it with your staff, and you do that, and water comes out from this rock. Can you imagine that? Picture that in your mind. Here's all these people gathered around, and water starts flowing out of this rock, enough for all of them to drink and take water back to their families and their herds and everything. What an incredible thing. You think you'd remember a rock like that? That rock would have a story. One of the lessons I think I'd see in there is that God provides. God provides water. Remember Elijah when he was fleeing from the Queen Jezebel that had a death warrant out for him. And God provided water in a brook, and he had ravens bringing food. Probably wasn't a McDonald's Happy Meal, but the ravens brought him food every day, and he had water from the stream there. God provided what he needed. And then when the brook dried up, he sent him to a widow that just had a little bit left, but God made that last for 3 years during a famine, a drought that was there. God provided. And that rock, that stone, can remind us that God can provide for us too. He can provide water, provide food. And then another stone that he probably remembers when God provided help for him. They're in a fight. Verse 10 says, still in Exodus, verse 10 says, Amalek came and fought Israel, and Moses ordered Joshua, select some men for us to go out and fight Amalek, and tomorrow I'll take my stand on top of the hill, overlooking the battlefield and holding the staff of God. And Joshua did what Moses ordered and went to the top of the hill, and it turned out that whenever Moses raised his hand, just picture it, when he raised his hand like that, Israel was winning. But when his hands got tired and he lowered his hands, Amalek was winning. And Moses' hands got very tired. So they got a stone and set it under him. And he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on each side, so that his hands remained up in the air like this until the sun went down, and Joshua defeated Amalek and the whole army in the battle. If you've ever been really tired, you can appreciate how Moses must have felt. And I'm sure he'd remember that stone. And if that stone had something to say, it might say that God can provide help when we need it. I'm sure you can probably think of a time that you've really been tired. A time when you really needed something, and then God provided it. I remember they'd asked for volunteers to be counselors at a Billy Graham movie when it was in Columbus. There were 4 of us from our little Methodist church that volunteered to be counselors, Patty and I and another couple, and they stationed us in a theater, a large theater, and with us there being counselors, there were 100 Baptists from a large Baptist church in town. So there were four of us Methodists and 100 Baptists. And we didn't argue doctrine or anything. We were there to counsel people that came forward to receive Christ after the Billy Graham movie. And after several weekends, you could sort of tell by the response of the crowd whether there was going to be a big response or not after the movie was over, because a local pastor would get up and give an invitation. And one night, the crowd was just really large. The place was packed. And they were real responsive. They laughed when they should laugh, and they oohed and awed at the right times. And you just knew this was going to be a big response at the end of the movie. And the problem was, the 4 of us little Methodists were the only ones there. And there were several hundred people in the theater, and we could just picture 100 people wanting to be prayed with and counseled and everything. And the 4 of us all grabbed a couple dozen little booklets and everything. And as the time came down to the close, we were looking around. We didn't know that the Baptists had some special thing going on, and they were all at this convention or something. And just before the pastor got up to give the invitation, the doors opened, and in came 100 Baptists. We were never so glad to see a bunch of Baptists in our life. But it's interesting, just when you really need something, whether it's food, water, help, whatever it is, God has a way of providing that. And I think that's one of the lessons that Moses' stone would tell us, that God provides help exactly what you need. One of the names of God is Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. He provided for Moses again and again. He provided for Elijah, for Abraham. In the New Testament, think of how he provided for Paul the Apostle, and he provides for us too. The God who provides. Now, there's another stone that I'm sure you all remember, and I just called it Israel's stone, because you read about it in Exodus 24, and you've probably heard a lot of preaching about it and so forth, called the 10 Suggestions. Or wait, maybe it's called the 10 Commandments. But listen to what it says. God said to Moses, Climb up higher on the mountain and wait for me there. I'll give you tablets of stone, the teachings and commandments that I've written to instruct them. So Moses got up, accompanied by Joshua's aide, and Moses climbed up the mountain of God, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of God settled down over Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called out from the cloud to Moses, in view of all the Israelites below, and the glory of God looked like a raging fire at the top of the mountain. Moses entered the middle of the cloud and climbed the mountain, and he was on the mountain with God for 40 days and 40 nights. Excuse me. And the Bible tells us, going on in the story, that God actually wrote the commandments. It says he wrote on both sides of the stone tablets. That was probably a real load carrying down these stone tablets. And they obviously didn't have a nice little computer disk or something like that. But you'd think you'd remember tablets like that. It's one of the stones that Moses had. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, we've all heard different things about the Ten Commandments. And as I was looking online, I noticed the Ten Commandments for children. Now, sometimes when you try to take a difficult concept, a theological concept, and explain it to a child, sometimes it loses something in the translation, but sometimes it comes across pretty clearly. I want you to listen. You know the Ten Commandments. I remember Pastor Tom taught you how to memorize them all by number, and some of you probably can still do that. But listen to what it says, the Ten Commandments for kids. Number 1, love God more than you love anything else. Number 2, don't make anything in your life more important than God. Number 3, always say God's name with love and respect. Number 4, honor the Lord by resting on the 7th day of the week. Number 5, love and respect your mom and dad. Number 6, never hurt anyone. I thought that was a good way to say that. You don't have to be all bloody and gory when you're talking with the kids. But just to say never hurt anyone, that says a lot. Words can hurt. Number 7, always be faithful to your husband or wife. Number 8, don't take anything that isn't yours. Number 9, always tell the truth. Well, you could go on for a while with that one, right? And number 10, be happy with what you have. Don't wish for other people's things. How about that? That's a pretty good way of boiling down the Ten Commandments and taking it out of the thou shalt theological realm and just putting it in common everyday language that even a kid can understand, but each of us can understand too what it's saying there. And I think one thing to remember as we look at this stone, the stone of the Ten Commandments, the lesson to go with it would be that God has rules. If you're writing down in your outline there, God has rules. But I think one thing to remember is that's a good starting place. It's not everything that God had to say about being holy, about being good, but it's a starting place. If you've been following the story of Hurricane Michael, and if you've seen some of the pictures on TV about some of the devastation in some of the coastal towns, in several places, there's the whole area is just wiped out by the hurricane. And they said there's one place that's been on news a lot where it shows the whole beach area, all the houses are blown down or away, destroyed except one. And there's one house that's still standing in the middle of all this devastation. And in looking at it further, they interviewed the couple that owned that house, and they said when they built the house, they got the rules and the zoning requirements and everything, the requirements for everything, and they always exceeded the requirements. In fact, when they were putting the foundations down into the ground, they went 10 feet farther than what was required. And in every one of the zoning requirements, they went beyond what was required. And in doing that, that is the only house on that whole beach area there that's still standing. Now that's a good reminder for us to not do just the minimum required to get by, but to go beyond. It reminded me, if I asked you if you remembered the story about King Solomon, when God showed up and asked him what he would like to have, it's one of those where every kid always thinks, wow, if God would just show up and ask me, what would you like, you know? But we all know what Solomon said. He asked for wisdom so he could govern the people. But the one thing that you don't know, unless you read the passage before, is why God showed up that night. Why that particular night did God show up? If you read the 2 verses before, you'll see that Solomon had gone to the temple, and as king, he was required to offer a certain sacrifice. And it just merely says after that, Solomon, as king, offered 1,000 sacrifices. One was required, he offered 1,000. Talk about lavish worship. And the very next verse says, then God appeared to him at night. What a commendation for someone. He went, talk about going, that's really going beyond, right? One was required. He gave 1,000 sacrifices. So the 10 Commandments is a good start, but even better is to go beyond what's just required. And number 4, there's a stone associated with Joshua. And some of you may remember the story. But when they crossed the Jordan River to get into the Promised Land, it says, when the whole nation was finally across, God spoke to Joshua, select 12 men from the people, a man from each tribe, and tell them right here in the middle of Jordan, where the feet of the priests are standing firm, take 12 stones, carry them across with you, and set them down in the place where you camp. And it goes on to say how he did that. And God says, a stone for each of the tribes, then you'll have something to mark this occasion later. And when your children ask what this was, what are these stones, you'll say the flow of the Jordan was stopped in front of the covenant of God as it crossed the Jordan. And these stones are a permanent memorial for the people of Israel. Joshua's stone, in fact 12 stones actually, one of the things that they tell us is to remember God's miracles. Now you would think, if you had been there to see the waters of the Jordan River stop while the ark and the people of Israel went across there, and the priests got those big stones out of the bottom of the riverbed and made a memorial altar with it, you would think you'd never forget that, right? But not so. Israel forgot. God knew they needed something to remember or they would forget. Some of the saddest words in the Bible are in Psalm 106. If you take time to read 106, you'll see over and over again, Israel forgot. They forgot the God who saved them. They forgot the miracles that he did. And over again, it tells about how they forgot. Ecclesiastes 3:5 says, where it's talking about a time for different things, it says there's a time to scatter stones, but there's a time to gather them. And all of Israel would realize what he meant by that. A time to gather stones from the bottom of the river and make an altar so you'll remember what God's done. There's some scriptures for me that are like those stones. That whenever I see that scripture, I remember a prayer that God answered or something that God did in my life. On Facebook just this morning, I saw a lady that's been going through some really difficult things. Her husband has had several amputations on his foot and in and out of the hospital, many surgeries. Even the days that they're out of the hospital, they're making trips to the ER. just a lot of stressful, difficult times. And she said she showed on Facebook this morning a wall hanging that she had gotten 23 years ago, where God told her, "I am hope." And she remembered that. And sometimes when you're having a difficult season, God will remind you of something. Just like these stones were to remind Israel, God will remind you that He is hope. He is everything that you need. And then, quickly, there's some stones. I thought of some stones when it came to Samson. Number 5, I put Samson's stones. The first reminder is when, remember after they captured Samson, so the Philistines grabbed him, gouged out his eyes, took him down to Gaza, and they shackled him in irons and put him in the work of grinding at a millstone, a grinding stone in prison. So the lesson, I think that stone, I'm sure when Samson, every time Samson saw that millstone, he would remember sin has consequences. Time and time again, he would go against what his parents said, go against what God said. He tried to do things in his own strength instead of God's strength, and this was the result. It left Samson shamed, sightless, and shackled. Someone put it this way: sin will blind you, bind you, and grind you down. I remember reading where someone said, sin will take you farther than you ever want to go, cost more than you ever want to pay, keep you longer than you ever want to stay, and leave you less than you ever hope to be. Sin has consequences. That would be a lesson from one of Samson's stones. But the other stone that I remember from Samson, it says, Samson's hair, though cut off, began to grow again. And while the Philistines were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring Samson out to entertain us." And you remember the story how they brought him out. And he stood between the stone pillars that held up the balcony where the rulers of the Philistines were seated. And Samson said, "Sovereign Lord, remember me and strengthen me just once more to get revenge on the Philistines." And Samson reached toward the 2 central stone pillars on which the temple stood, and bracing himself against them, he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed more people when he died than all while he had lived. Samson, growing up, he always counted on his strength instead of God's. He saw the result of that. But once he learned that his real strength was from God, God allowed him to perform one final act of strength. And the reminder for this stone, I put down the lesson is, God is my strength. At a time when you feel like you need more strength than you have, God is your strength. I thought of a couple songs that may be familiar to you. One that says, "On that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing your praise, singing unending 10,000 years and forevermore." Steve Chapman has a song that says, "His strength is perfect when our strength is gone. He'll carry us when we can't carry on. Raised in His power, the weak become strong. His strength is perfect." The Bible tells us to seek the Lord, to seek His strength, and to seek His face. Another song that I like called "Tell Me" says, "I can find my strength knowing I am yours." As you think about these different stones in the Bible and the lesson that they have for us, God knows where you are. God provides. God has rules. Remember God's miracles. Sin has consequences, and God is our strength. Even stones can have something to say, and these are some Bible stones that can remind us something. Our closing hymn is number 520.